Hi, Nick. Wonderful to have you here, and thanks so much for taking your time for Casla. We're very excited to hear about HQLA-X and certainly what's happening in your world. So, welcome.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to Casla about HQLA-X.
Fantastic. Nick, would you be able to tell us a little bit more as an introduction about yourself, HQLA-X, and how it all started?
Yeah, no, sure. So I'd be very happy to do that. So I'm Nick Short. I'm the COO of HQLA-X, and I've been involved in HQLA-X for about 5 years now. And prior to that, I spent 17 years at Goldman Sachs working with one of the co-founders of HQLA-X on various collateral management and securities lending solutions there. And the reason why HQLA-X came to be was that the two co-founders of HQLA-X, who were in various securities lending and collateral management roles and treasury roles at their respective institutions, felt in those roles the need to move security around more freely than was possible in the marketplace. And this was particularly felt in Europe, primarily, where there are a number of custodians and a number of tri-party agents, and optimizing collateral across all of those different locations in Europe is something that was felt very keenly, and also is somewhat of a friction to enabling institutions to satisfy their internal liquidity coverage ratio metrics and other regulatory metrics, where they need to hold collateral in certain places and fine tune those numbers at certain points of the year. And so the idea behind the platform is to enable collateral ownership to change more freely. And by doing that, what we've built is a solution that enables ownership of collateral to change more freely without having to physically move the securities from A to B. That, in a nutshell, is what the platform aims to do. And back in the day, we formed a consortium of a number of institutions and banks within Europe to explore how a new emerging technology, I say new then, emerging technology called distributed ledger technology, or sometimes called blockchain, could help solve that particular business problem. And we worked with R3 to put that consortium together, did a proof of concept, executed a live pilot transaction, and then carried on building the platform. And the platform is live today.
That's amazing. I think that's a really good genesis in terms of its application, and certainly that mobility issue has been one that's been around for a long time, and certainly solutions to these I would say be desperately needed. Um, just kind of continuing on that theme, why is DLT then so suitable for something like securities lending, specifically, coming from a Casla perspective, where we'd be looking at helping our constituents understand, what some of these benefits would be.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, so we're using DLT to effectively be a ledger of ownership that sits above the existing tri-party agent and custodian world. And also it has all of the required permissioning and security needed to achieve that. But on that ledger, we are recording ownership of baskets of securities, where those securities remain at the underlying custodian and tri-party agents for safekeeping purposes. So they satisfy all the existing and obviously very important regulations regarding the safekeeping of securities, but the ownership of those securities, and just kind of recapping, the securities in our model stay where they are so if I want to give you some securities, I put them into a custodian, say in Europe, and then I represent ownership of them on the HQLA-X ledger, and then via the obligation that you and I agree to, will change ownership of that basket of securities on the ledger. So you become an owner of those securities, but they haven't moved at that point of ownership change. They haven't moved, and so DLT lends itself very well to that that type of ownership transfer. It also enables it to happen at precise moments in time. So you and I can agree to exchange ownership at well, I don't know what the time is where you are, but let's just say 12:30. 30 minutes after midday, and then we can unwind it. We can unwind it 4 hours later. So you can be as precise as that. In fact, what I've just described is an intraday trade, which is also of particular interest to our clients. And also, extending that theme, we can exchange ownership outside of normal custodian cutoff times and settlement times, and that's another big value add that the platform allows, and it allows ownership change to take place freely at precise moments in time and when you want. The other big advantage of the DLT solution that we've built, and the reason why we used distributed ledger technology, is that the trade I've just described, we've gone live with a solution for upgrade downgrade trades. So extending our example, I'd give you a basket of securities, Steve, and you would give me a basket of securities in return. And one of the things that the platform and this technology allows you to do is to exchange that ownership simultaneously. So it either happens or it doesn't happen. There's no need for one of us to go first, creating credit exposure to the other. There's no need for two DVP legs where there's cash involved. What we've built, I think, is, we call it DVD, so delivery versus delivery. There's no need for any cash, and there's no need for one side to go first before the other one.
That's fascinating, and I think that delivery versus delivery principle was something that was really sought after. I think even in the current security settlement systems when they were developed, but you can't get away from conditionality in the current technology world. Even if it's minuscule, there's always going to be conditionality. So I think that represents certainly quite a significant shift change. And being able to operate outside of those cutoffs. I mean, that is just simply not possible given the current ecosystem dynamics. So new technology like this certainly does present new opportunities that just simply wouldn't exist. And maybe just on the back of that, I mean, you've also done something quite amazing. You've managed to get all the global tri-parties to work together in this model. I mean, that's no small feat. How difficult was it to get everyone to kind of work together, and do you see any more tri-parties joining in the future?
Yeah, well, let me answer the second question first, because it's easier to answer. I definitely see other tri-party agents and custodians joining in the future, and we're in discussion with a few as we speak. But in terms of the first part of your question, how difficult, I think it wasn't straightforward. I mean, this is a new thing, but I think that there was generally an appreciation that number one, that the market needed this, and then number two, this new type of solution was going to happen one way or another, and then thirdly, I think that we've worked with a number of the custodians and tri-party agents connected to our platform who understood over time how innovation can help improve their offering to clients as well. So I'm not going to pretend it was straightforward and we just flicked a switch and it happened, but certainly I feel like we've got to a good place where we are now, and it feels like we've got everybody along for the journey, and indeed, many of the names that are connected to our platform are also, shareholders in HQLA-X and have invested as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a major achievement. And then maybe just changing gears a little into some of the underlying technology and the details around it. So you spoke about ownership changes on the records effectively of HQLA-X. Is that tokenization or is it something else? How is that ownership being reflected in the books of HQLA-X?
So that is a good question. I think that we refer to it as a record of ownership of securities that are held for safekeeping at the underlying custodians and tri-party agents. I think, is it tokenization? I think that's a pretty open-ended question, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure we've got the time to go through all of the kind of the parameters that determine whether something's a token or not. But what I would say, and maybe this is the reason why you asked the question, is that sometimes when people talk about tokenization, there's an underlying assumption that the asset has been issued on the ledger in the first place, and that's not the case with our operating model to date. These are, what we have on our ledger is a representation of ownership of securities, but those securities were already issued via, away from HQLA-X in the existing world, if you like. So I think that's probably the big difference, and I think that's probably the reason why we don't call it tokenization, because there hasn't been, a tokenization step that involved issuing the underlying asset onto our ledger in the first place.
So it effectively a representation of ownership on the ledger.
Yes.
And
yes.
Did that bring any challenges in terms of what happens in the case of default? Does it steer more away from recharacterizing these trades, which would be a risk?
Well, I think that because it's a record of ownership and the securities stay where they are, as it were. I think that we that issue has somewhat we somewhat avoided that issue. Yeah, the default part of your question is a very interesting and good part of the question, and it's definitely worth me stating that although the DLT and the technology is important to the overall operating model, what's equally important and maybe even slightly more important is actually the legal structure that that we've built that underpins the operating model of the platform, and frankly underpins and enforces ownership on our ledger. And as part of that, all of the default protocols have been considered. We've used a globally renowned law firm throughout that process to build the legal structure to ensure that all the default protocols and default scenarios are catered for, and everybody knows who owns what at each point in the life cycle.
Excellent. And then kind of moving on to the more commercial aspects of HQLA-X. Currently more European focused, but are there some plans to eventually extend particularly into North America, which is of course our interest? And then second to that, can these trades be applied domestically, or are they predominantly cross-border?
Yeah, so a great question. So again, I'm going to take your second question first because it's easier. So that they can be both cross-border and domestic. We work with clients to address particular pain points that they face, and we have a product roadmap that extends way beyond the initial DVD offering. And then getting back to the first part of your question, yes, we're focused on Europe. And I think the reason for that primarily is that there's just more, or we think that there's more collateral fragmentation in Europe because there are more custodians and tri-party agents in Europe. But to answer the key point here is, yes, we will expand to North America and we will expand to Asia too. Actually, it's just a question of when and timing. Our goal remains to establish the platform in Europe, get the flows up and running. But it is worth stating that we're working with many clients and shareholders of the company who are global by nature, and in fact, many of them are actually North American by nature as well. So I think it's only a matter of time that we establish the platform in North America.
Excellent. And then I'm gonna mention something that you mentioned a little bit earlier about the delivery versus delivery capability of HQLA-X. Do you think that in future this lends itself nicely or is a good fit for securities lending, which, as we know, it's a loan covered by collateral, and so often, delivery versus delivery has been this holy grail.
Yes. So the short answer is yes, and in fact, it's in the public domain that we're working with a couple of agency securities lenders, and also actually we're working with some principal lenders too. So the short answer is yes, and we're working through the detail of how that would work, but largely speaking, it's an extension of the existing DVD model, and we are very focused on getting that model up and running with agent lenders. So yes is the short answer.
That's very encouraging, and maybe just kind of moving into the last kind of technical aspect. What's very important, of course, for securities lending is the ability to oil the system effectively. The reuse of collateral. Is reuse of collateral enabled in HQLA-X?
It is something that we are focused on building this year, and so, for example, going back to our example trade, I give you a basket of securities, you give me a basket of securities. What reuse will enable is for you to then go and use the basket of securities that I gave to you in some other subsequent transaction, and that could be, for example, another upgrade downgrade with another market participant, or it could be to satisfy initial margin via a pledge, and there's various other options too, but those are kind of two leading candidate examples of how we will achieve reuse of that basket of securities to enable you to reuse the same basket to satisfy another obligation.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's going to be a really key piece of functionality for certain, and very encouraging to hear what's happening on the agency lending front. Certainly going to be of a lot of interest to Casla, particularly in terms of our constituents. So I just want to thank you, Nick, so much for taking your time out. I really appreciate it, and I would love to do another one of these as your securities lending capability extends and its applicability into North American markets and Canada specifically. So thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure, and thank you. And I'd love to come back and talk some more about HQLA-X at any point. So thank you.
We'll arrange that. Have a good one.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.